All right. Good evening. Just going to wait for others to come in and we'll talk about a very interesting piece of history, which involves a multifaceted operation noted as the Millennium bombing plot, which was to take place on or around the turn of the millennium, January 1st of 2000. There are many multifaceted uh, avenues regarding this plot and many players involved. And what's interesting is that the intelligence services, foreign anyway, had broken up the plot. And what's interesting about that is that the domestic agencies, such as the National Security Agency and the CIA, uh, most likely knew about the plot because they had conducted a monitoring operation involving Osama bin Laden's satellite phone and, of course, an Al Qaeda communications hub located in the capital of Yemen, Sana'a. So, what I'm going to do today in this discussion tonight is give a timeline of events leading up to the Millennium bombing plot, and what did the intelligence agencies miss, or what did they know? And I think this is very important because the information I'm going to be using is from historical documentation from those who have been captured by the intelligence services and the military abroad in Pakistan and in Afghanistan, and the certain players that were involved with this plot, as well as news articles in which I will give references to with certain points. And so I think what I'm going to start with is an article dated December 20th of 2000, where it's from CNN, and the headline is USS Cold Plot began after embassy attacks, investigators say. An individual by name of Mohammed Omar al-Harazi, a known associate of accused terrorist Osama bin Laden, first called conspirators in Yemen about attacking a U.S. warship immediately after the August 1998 bombings of two U.S. embassies in East Africa, a U.S. investigator close to the case told CNN. U.S. and Yemeni authorities have also confirmed the identity of one of the two men suspected of being the suicide bombers in the October 12 attack on the USS Cole in Aden. USS officials told CNN the man's real name was Saeed Awad al Kamri. Yemeni officials said he was from the same state, from the same Yemeni province as the bin Laden family, though bin Laden was raised in Saudi Arabia. U.S. and Yemeni investigators have found evidence linking bin Laden's Al Qaeda group to the Cole bombing in the harbor of Aden, Yemen, although they say they are not ready to accuse bin Laden of ordering the attacks. According to Yemeni authorities, al-Harazi remains at large, was the operations leader of the Cole attack, as he provided the money for the bombing and is a possible link to other militants outside the country involved in the attacks. U.S. and allied officials have told CNN that al-Harazi, who sometimes goes by other names, um, such as Abdul Rahman Hussein al-Nashiri or al-Nasir, and is a cousin of the suicide bomber who carried out the attack on the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi. And one of that suicide bomber was known as Azam. Um, and so I'm going to construct the timeline of events leading up to and after the Millennium Plot. So in mid-August of 1998, the after the bombings of the East Africa Embassy bombings in Nairobi in Kenya, um, an Al Qaeda associate, Abid al Rahim al Nashiri, called a number in Yemen to discuss attacking USS warship. Al Nashiri would go on to have a prominent role later on in the attacks against the Sullivans and the Cole in Yemen. And remember this name, he's important, he's central to a lot of these plots. U.S. authorities learned of this call no later than December of 2000, although it is not clear how they do so. Now, that's coming from the CNN article that I just read about. But how would they get this information? Well, as I've said numerous times in other videos, the information would come from, most likely, either from the CIA, who has a base station in every city in the world, or from the NSA monitoring the Al Qaeda communications hub in Yemen, which was not known, incidentally, to the State Department officials. Um, why they didn't share a lot of this information with them, that's the $100,000 question. Now, the number called by al Nashiri is not disclosed by the media, but some of al Nashiri's associates lived at the Al Communications Hub in Yemen. And who would that be? Ahmed al Hada, who owned the home? Khalid al Midar, who was married to the daughter of Ahmed al Hada, who later on would have a role in the hijacking of Flight 77 on September 11, 2001. Now, several months later, a Spanish newspaper will later claim that one of the Millennium plotters named Ahmed Rassam had met with Muhammad Atta in the Alicante region of Spain in that year. And it's unclear whether the men trained at the same camp while they were in Afghanistan. And this is coming from a Reuters article dated November 26, 2001. According to other Spanish reports, in 1997 or 1998, Muhammad Atta was indeed a student in Alicante. And after his arrest, which I'll detail in a bit, Rassam began cooperating with U.S. investigators, leading to the possibility that he could have confirmed Muhammad Atta's identity as an Al Qaeda operative before 9/11, if he'd just been asked. Now, it's incredible when you think about it that Ahmed Rassam's arrest by British Columbia authorities and then handed over to the FBI. Now, why? Now, the FBI would not know this because the CIA and the NSA were not sharing information with the FBI about any of the hijackers or operatives involved with the September 11th plots. So they wouldn't know to ask Rassam about Muhammad Atta. Now, had they have known, 9/11 could have been prevented. Same thing with Khalid al-Midar and Nawaf Hazmi, which was known by the CIA and the NSA and Saudi authorities and the Israeli spying rings, which were two of them. If that was shared with the FBI, with the Department of State, well, 9/11 could have been prevented. On June 24th, 1999, CIA Director Tenet tells a closed session in Congress, and I'm going to quote you what he said. Quote, "We have seen numerous reports that bin Laden and his associates are planning terrorist attacks against U.S. officials and facilities in a variety of locations, including in the United States." This is 99. End quote. Now, if the CIA knew that Al Qaeda had the capabilities to attack the United States in the United States, well, then why didn't federal authorities warn immigration, airline officials, border security to take stricter measures regarding Arabs coming from, say, Saudi Arabia or Afghanistan? Well, there's a reason. It's because they had lack security regarding these areas. And also, when it comes to immigration, there was a fast track from Saudi Arabia to the United States called the Visa Express program, where they didn't do any strict security measures regarding Saudi nationals to the United States because they didn't want to offend their allies. Now, 6 months later, after a well-publicized attempt Al Qaeda attack on a Los Angeles airport, um, Tenet doesn't mention in an open session that bin Laden has the capabilities to stage attacks inside the United States, even though Tenet knew this. So why didn't he tell congressional investigators about this in '99? It would seem that almost uh, the CIA were basically still trying to cover up the fact that Al Qaeda had the capabilities of conducting attacks inside the United States. Now, if we go back many, many years to the early '90s, even to the late '80s, we had Arab fundamentalist cells, not even Al Qaeda, that were inside the United States. Could they have indeed been indirectly part of these operations by training these sleeper cells inside the United States, such as Los Angeles or Boston, New York, Arizona, where Al Qaeda and also older Arab organizations existed? We'll not know because this information is classified. And the CIA is certainly not telling us. Why? On November 30th, 1999, thankfully, Jordanian officials successfully uncover an Al Qaeda plot to blow up the Radisson Hotel in Amman, Jordan, and as well as other areas and sites on January 1st of 2000. This is the Millennium plot, part of it anyway. Now, Jordanian authorities intercept a call between Abu Zubaydah, who is a suspected Al Qaeda leader in Chaldean training camp, and a suspected Jordanian terrorist named Abu Hoshar. And according to Jordanian officials, they heard Zubaydah say the training is over and the grooms are ready for the big wedding. Now, of course, this call reflected an extremely poor code system because the FBI had already determined in the wake of the embassy bombings in '98 that wedding, the word wedding, was an Al Qaeda code word for bomb. Furthermore, it appears that Al Qaeda fails to change their system because the code name for the 9/11 attacks is also the Big Wedding. It was also a book by Sandra Hicks, which is a very wise title for those in the know. And if Al Qaeda is using lax security regarding plots, you tell me that the NSA, who were listening to the phone calls at the Al Qaeda communications hub of Yemen, couldn't break this code? What do you think they were talking about on those phones? Jordan would arrest Hoshar while he was on the phone talking to Zubaydah in the middle as they kicked down the door. And in the next few days, 27 other suspects are charged. And later on, Jordan, the military courts in Jordan would convict 22 of them for participating in these planned attacks and even sentence 6 of them to death. And in addition to bombing the Radisson Hotel around the start of the Millennium, the plan called for suicide bombings on 2 border crossings with Israel and a Christian baptism site. And further attacks in Jordan were planned for later, almost like a second wave of attacks, in which the plotters had stockpiled 16 tons of TNT, which was enough to destroy multiple neighborhoods. And other key plotters that were uncovered by Jordanian officials included these individuals. Raed Hijazi. He's a U.S. citizen who is living in Boston, who is part of a Boston Al Qaeda cell Later on, he would be arrested and convicted in late of 2000. Another individual is Khalid Deek, who was also a U.S. citizen living in Anaheim, California, who's part of a sleeper cell for Al Qaeda in California. Now, he would be arrested in Pakistan, deported to Jordan, but he would strangely be released without ever going to trial. Another individual is Abu Musab al Zarqawi. If that name even rings a bell, he would later go on to form Al Qaeda in Iraq, which later became uh, Al Qaeda, the Islamic State, and the Levant. Now he escapes arrest, but he's later sentenced in absentia. And finally, another individual is Luai Sakra, um, in which the Washington Post said that he played a role in the plot, but he's never charged for it. And Sakra is apparently a CIA informant, which is alleged to have started around the year 2000. I believe he's still alive to this day. Now, Jordanian government will also claim that the Al Taqwa Bank in Switzerland helped finance the network of operatives who planned this attack. And the bank actually is shut down shortly after 9/11. Um, and because of concerns that Al Qaeda will launch attacks during the Millennium celebrations in the United States, the um, the Justice Department and the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court um, would alter the set of procedures known as the wall, which is the known as a proverbial wall, which is there for the intelligence services to follow the law and not break that law by sharing intelligence with other agencies when they shouldn't. Now, the wall governs the sharing of intelligence inside the FBI between the FBI and prosecutors, but that no longer was the case in 2000. And as a result of these changes, it becomes easier for the FBI to obtain wiretap warrants from the court, um, which has a pro and a con to it because this later on, after 9/11, this becomes even obtaining wiretap for civilians who are not affiliated with terrorism. And the court itself becomes a wall with the authority to determine what information could be released to prosecutors. After 9/11, that wall even came down too. And now the FBI could just obtain warrants if you're suspected of terrorism. What does that even mean? It's a vague term. Now, U.S. Attorney Patrick Fitzgerald, who's working with the bin Laden squad in New York called the I-49 squad, he actually will later complain about the lack of information prosecutors receive around the Millennium Plot. And he actually says that criminal prosecutors receive the information only in part with the lag time so as to not breach the wall. The persons who determined what could be shared with the prosecutors were on the other side of that wall, making their best guess as to what would be helpful. And that there was no way to defend our country from imminent attack. And that's why, because of this, the wall was basically removed. But there's another fellow attorney, Andrew McCarty, who is most notably for his prosecution of La Cosa Nostra top officials during the mid 90s. He said that the change was not that unusual and that the wall could be raised or lowered based on the Department of Justice perception of the threat environment at any given time. And that's the convenience the Department of Justice has. Well, after 9/11, that's no longer the case. They could just label you a terrorist, even though you have no terrorist connections whatsoever, and that they can monitor you at any given time whenever they want. Now, the CIA learns from the Jordanian government about the Al Qaeda Millennium bombing plot in that country. Further, the CIA concludes more attacks are likely soon, including inside the United States. Now, counterterrorism Czar Richard Clark, who heads the Counterterrorism National Security Council under the Clinton and Bush administrations, is told of this operation and implements a plan to neutralize the threat. Now, this is coming from Richard Clark's book, Against All Odds, and this is on page 205. And he actually says that the plan approved by President Clinton focuses on harassing and disrupting Al Qaeda members throughout the world, and that the FBI is put on heightened alert, in which counterterrorism teams are dispatched overseas, and a formal ultimatum is given to the Taliban to keep Al Qaeda under control, and friendly intelligence agencies are asked to help. Excuse me. There are even cabinet level meetings nearly every day. And Clark was behind this too. It's the one thing I give him credit for. At least he made counterterrorism a priority under the Clinton administration. Now, all U.S. embassies, military bases, police departments, they're given warnings to be on the lookout for signs of from Al Qaeda near the Millennium. But no terror attacks happen. And Clark will claim that the FBI generally remains unhelpful, even. For example, around the Millennium, the FBI said there are no websites in the U.S. soliciting volunteers for training in Afghanistan or money for terrorist front groups. Now, Clark, ever so crafty, hired a private citizen check to see if this was true, and within days, he's actually given a list, a long list of such websites. You know, I tend to give the FBI a lot of credit in certain areas, but when you hear about this, you're like, what? How the hell did they miss this? Now, when Clark finds out this information, he gives it to the FBI and the Justice Department. And what do they do with it? Well, much like the Bajinka plot, where they knew that Al Qaeda operatives and even Arab terrorist groups were willing to hijack planes and bomb them in the air, and then have a sleeper cell inside the United States willing to hijack 10 more planes and crash them all over the United States. Did they tell the airline industry to beef up security? No. What did the FBI do with it? Nothing. Well, when Clark gave this information about the long list of terrorist operatives who are training in Afghanistan, trying to gain money from mosques and organizations here in the U.S., they failed to do anything with the information. Nothing was stopped. The sites were not shut down and seized by Interpol or even from the FBI. Nothing was done. Why? Again, why not? Why not? You would think at this point, they're actually saying, hey, wait a minute. We just had the Bajinka plot in 1995. We just had the Khobar Towers bombing in 96. We just had the embassy bombings in 98. We just had a Millennium threat bombing operation. Hey, we need to start beefing up security here. No, they do nothing. The NSA, the CIA, the FBI, nothing. And Lord knows what the Israelis were doing inside the country, as well as the Saudis, foreign intelligence, what they knew, because we'll never know, because we deported them all after 9/11. And they were in the country far beyond that. What the hell did they collect? Well, you can get even just an inkling by just reading the Shea Memorandum. Now look up Shea Memorandum PDF. That's coming from a California-based lawyer named Gerald Shea, who, under his own money, warranted an investigation with Israeli and Saudi intelligence operatives that were monitoring who? Al-Qaeda affiliates inside the United States, something the FBI, the CIA, the NSA should have been sharing with the State Department, but did not. Now, after this is part of this plot is done, Khalid al-Mihdhar, who's living in the house in Yemen, tells another operative, that Al Qaeda is planning a ship bombing attack. Now, how do we know this? Because the United States will learn this from a detainee who's interviewed in December of 2001. The detainee told investigators that Al Midar informed him that Al Qaeda operative Abd al Rahim al Nashiri, who I mentioned before, was the plot's originator. Al Nashiri discussed the ship bombing attack in a telephone call made in late 1998. And guess where the call went to? It went to the Al Qaeda communications hub where Al Midar lived in Yemen. What a fucking revelation. Holy shit, now we have information coming from a detainee who, by the way, you fringe conspiracy theorists out there who don't believe that hijackers or operatives exist. Well, here we have a detainee's own words given to authority suggesting that an operation may have been heard on the phone in which the NSA is listening to. An amazing revelation. If this is true, the NSA is complicit at least with the Millennium plots. Well, why didn't they stop it? Why didn't they stop the USS Cole bombing? This is unbelievable when you think about it. Now, they, according to this detainee, the call, which was definitely picked up by the NSA, because we know the NSA was monitoring the sub from 1996 to 2001, and that's 5 years prior to 9/11, by the way. This is the reason why I keep telling you that the NSA is the lead agency involving all information. What do you think they were talking about on these phones? Talking about operations. That Al Qaeda plans to attack a warship called the USS Sullivans. This is part of the Millennium plot. This happened before the USS Cole bombing. Now, that was supposed to happen on January 3rd of 2000. Al Midar, who would be accused rightfully of participating in the plot to bomb the USS Cole in Yemen, travels to Yemen shortly before the attack on the Sullivans and apparently leaves 1 day after it failed. He was also there days before the attack on the Cole. Now, why is this a big issue? Because if the intelligence services knew that Al Midar was there before the Cole, then that means that they should have warned the FBI that he was coming to the United States. That's why. And the CIA and the NSA did not. On December 9th, 1999, attention focused on the fact that two plotters inside the United States were longtime U.S. residents. And Bill Clinton's national security advisor, Sandy Berger, sends a memo to President Clinton about these two men. And I've mentioned these names before, Raid Hijazi and Khalil Deek. Hijazi, who lived in California, then moved to Boston and drives a taxi there for several years. Now, take this with a grain of salt coming from 9/11 Commission. 9/11 Commission will later say that Berger tells Clinton that Deek was a naturalized U.S. citizen who had been in touch with extremists in the U.S. as well as abroad. And that later in the month, Richard Clark warns Berger in an email, quote, foreign terrorist sleeper cells are present in the U.S. and attacks in the U.S. are likely, end quote. What did the FBI do? What did the Department of Justice do? Well, Deek's arrested on December 11th. But later, shockingly, he's released without being charged. You can't make this shit up. A few days later, Clark authorizes a study to look into Deek's connections, which are many, but no action is taken until it is discovered that Deke's next door neighbor is still living in Anaheim, California, Raid Hijazi, running an Al Qaeda sleeper cell there before going off to Boston and running a sleeper cell there as well. Similarly, miraculously, Hijazi will not be arrested inside the United States. He's actually arrested overseas months later for connections with terrorist activity. Well, we had him here in the United States. Why didn't we do that? It's amazing. U.S. intelligence, like the intelligence services, are oblivious that there are other Al Qaeda operatives who are roommates with this guy, including a major guy who has networks not just with Al Qaeda affiliates, but with Al Qaeda leaders. And I've done a video about him, and I have a fellow researcher named DJ Thermal Detonator who talk about this individual. His name is Nabil al-Maraba, who actually has a connection with the 9/11 plot, and he's a financial courier for Al Qaeda. He's also an infamous individual, and I'm not going to get into much about that because this video is going to be long. But al-Maraba has a deep connection to Al Qaeda, and the FBI knows it. Now, still, with all this information I just passed, investigators will fail to act on the knowledge of financial transactions between Hijazi and three, not one, not two, but three Al Qaeda hijackers of 9/11. Just amazing. Maybe that's the reason why Muhammad Atta and Abdulaziz al-Amari went to Portland, which is not too far from Logan. Why else would they go there? And almost miss the most important terrorist plot in history. On December 14th, 1999, an Algerian by the name of Ahmed Rassam is arrested in Port Angeles, Washington, he's attempting to enter the United States in a car that has bomb-making materials in it. And it's enormous, the amount of materials. It's actually, according to Port Valencia port authorities, 130 pounds of chemicals and detonator components are found inside his rental car. This guy was going to blow up the whole airport, which was Los Angeles International. Now, when he's investigated and he's interrogated by authorities and the FBI, he actually admits to bombing Los Angeles International on December 31st, 1999. Now, thankfully, to the Border Patrol agent, her name is Diana Dean, stops him. And because there were nationwide warnings about to look for suspicious activity, but it was vague. What do you mean by suspicious activity? Later on, Bassam actually says that he was part of a wave of attacks against U.S. targets over the New Year's Eve weekend. And when she opens up the trunk and finds all this material, Bassam actually runs, but he doesn't get far because they actually detain him and he's actually arrested. Now, just a little background of Bassam. Bassam actually entered Canada on February 20th, 1994, using a fake, illegally altered French passport in the name of Anjar Tahar Majadi. He later settles in the east end of Montreal and lives with other Algerian immigrants that went with him in an apartment. And later on, authorities would later come to investigate him because he was known to be a pickpocket, a robber, a petty thief. And they found out that this guy is connected to a cell in Montreal called the Armed Islamic Group. Now, if you've heard that name before, they are a major Islamic entity who's fighting against the Algerian government regarding French influence in the country, and the armed Islamic group basically were a terrorist organization, labeled terrorist organization, that committed a lot of crimes in the was it 12, 13-year civil war that happened there. Um, According to Canadian security intelligence services, the officials there, that Wassam was under surveillance as part, get this, as part of an investigation into suspected terrorist rings since 1996. We're talking about Canada here. This is 5 years prior to 9/11. So this borderway between Canada and the United States is huge because we're getting Al Qaeda affiliates to come not directly inside the United States, but to go through Canada, to go through border security inside the United States. How many entered this way? We won't know. There's probably a lot. Um, on March 17th, 1998, Ahmed Assam becomes interested in joining a jihad in Algeria, where he's from. Like I said, they're fighting a civil war against the government. And Rassam actually travels from Montreal to Karachi, Pakistan, but he uses a false passport. He goes by the name Benny Norris. While he's there in Peshawar, he's contacted by Abu Zubaydah, who is at this point thought to supervise Afghanistan training terrorist camps funded by bin Laden. One of them is the Khaldean training camp, which basically was shut down by the Taliban later on. Abu Zubaydah arranged for Rassam to be transported over the Khyber Pass into Afghanistan in April of that year of 98 using the alias Nabil. Is that in reference to Nabil al-Maraba? Now, according to Rassam, he attends 3 camps between March of 98 and February of 99. And at the Chaldean camp, which hosted anywhere between 50 to 100 trainees at any time, that's coming from Abu Zubaydah and other Al Qaeda affiliates that were captured over the years. And that Rassam would tell investigators that he trained in light weapons such as handguns, small machine guns, rocket propelled grenades, poisons, C4, small arms fire. Now, the trainees were from all over the Arabian Peninsula and even Europe. Countries like Algeria, Yemen, Germany, Chechnya, Turkey, France. And that, according to Rassam, during his 6 months or 5 months, whatever it is, of training that he was there, he met Zacharias Moussaoui, the alleged 20th hijacker. And that he trained for 6 weeks with him in how to manufacture advanced explosives and make electronic circuits at another camp called Darunta, which is basically outside of Jalalabad, Afghanistan. It's another training camp that was later shut down by Al Qaeda. Now, like I said, keep in mind, all of what I'm saying here is coming from what we know through the public record, and also what don't we know? Because all this is known by the NSA and the CIA because of their monitoring of the communications hub in Yemen, as well as people who were involved with the Millennium Plot and other plots that were arrested afterwards and gave information about certain plots that were upcoming. And they didn't act on this information. Meanwhile, Rassam is being interrogated, and he tells authorities that in August of 99, he told that in August of 99, he decided to bomb Los Angeles International, which was the 3rd busiest airport in the world at the time, because he was actually familiar with it and also thought it would be politically and economically sensitive target. And what he was going to do was that I don't know how he was going to pull this off, but he was actually going to conduct a rehearsal using a luggage cart, putting it in a place that was not suspicious, and observing how long it would take for airport security to notice. Now, that's pretty crafty. But 130 pounds of explosive material in how many bags? If there's 3 bags and they're huge, it could cause some concern. But if it's hidden correctly, I can see how it could get away with it. It's a pretty crafty operation. Now, he planned to execute his plan in a passenger waiting area inside the airport using 2 to 3 suitcases filled with C4 explosives and dynamite. Wow. As part of the operation, also, there's multifaceted parts of the Millennium plot. And I'm going to name some of them now. On December 24th, 1999, that's Christmas Eve, 5 militants of the Al Qaeda linked Harkat al Mujahideen group um, hijacked um, Indian Airlines 8484, I want to say. Could be wrong about that number, the flight number, in which the hijackers reportedly told the captain, uh, fly slowly into India because we have to give a Millennium gift to the officials there. Now, what they did was they put a bomb in the cargo room of the plane, which was timed to go off at midnight. The plane eventually lands in the Taliban controlled area of Kandahar, where incidentally there's a training camp. And on December 31st, India agreed to the demands of the Harakut uh, Mujahideen group. Thank you, Darren Harvey, 814. That's flight 814. Thank you. India agrees to release 3 captive militants in exchange for the nearly 200 people that were going to be blown up on this airplane. But there was one militant that would have cause for concern that was going to be released. And he's the infamous Omar Saeed Sheikh, who was once trained by the Pakistan ISI and was known to British MI6. And he has a lot of connections, and he's a noted terrorist. He was arrested for his part in the beheading of Daniel Pearl, in which he was let go. Supposedly, Omar Saeed Sheikh was the man who gave Daniel Pearl to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who beheaded him. Was Sheikh let go because he was known to British MI6 and the Pakistan ISI? I don't know. How is he released? He's a noted terrorist. On December 31st, 1999, other attacks were launched by a group of up to like 300 militants from radical Islamists in Jordan, attacking Lebanese army of forces in the Dinia district in northern Lebanon. Now, the group behind the attack, calling itself Takfir wal Hijr Group, was led by Bassam Kanj, who's an associate of who? Raid Hijazi, the Boston Al Qaeda associate, in which the FBI allowed to just walk away from the United States. Bassam Kanj had been indicted for his involvement in the Jordan bombing plots. And that had a little bit about the history between Kanj and Hijazi. Kanj had met Hijazi in the Khaldean training camp in Afghanistan. And later on, Hijazi got Kanj to work at the same Boston taxi company in the mid 1990s in the United States. And here they are fighting in this part, which is part of the Millennium plot, fighting against the Lebanese army forces. Now, the fighting lasted for 8 days. And according to Lebanese report, 11 soldiers, 5 civilians, and 28 Islamists were killed. Also, on January 3rd of 2000 in Yemen, two men from Al Qaeda attempted to use a boat laden with explosives. I think it was over 200 pounds in a small dingy boat, which sank to the sea before it got to damage the USS Sullivans. Duh. You would think that, we would test it on a small boat to see how much it could hold, but thankfully that didn't happen. And that was the multifaceted operation of the Millennium Plot. That's a lot. There was a lot of layers to it. Now, I'm not done. While in prison, awaiting trial, Rassam actually reveals that Al Qaeda sleeper cells existed in the United States. We're talking the year 2000 here. And this information would be included in the most important document, or one of the most, pre 9/11 intelligence. It's called the Presidential Daily Brief, which was dated August 6, 2001, entitled Bin Laden Determined to Strike in United States. Most of the information was revealed to them from Ahmed Rassam, including the hijacking of airplanes. Now, in the wake of the arrest of Rassam and his revelation of the Millennium Plot and the operators, FBI investigators then run out and try to uncover Millennium Plots before the end of the year. And U.S. authorities do make a number of arrests, including one. A telephone number found in Rassam's pocket led to Abdelghani Meskini, who's an Algerian living in New York City, who had gone to Seattle to meet Rassam. And Meskini is monitored and arrested in New York on December 30th, 1999. Two, according to a Times article, New York Time magazine, dated February 7th of 2000, one of Rassam's credit cards leads to the arrest of Mokhtar Harouri, an Algerian living in Montreal, Canada, who travels inside the United States. Remember, I'm talking about the conduit between Canada and the United States. Meskini is arrested and later cooperates with U.S. investigators, but he's never charged. Harouri, who's ratted on by Meskini, he's actually sentenced to 24 years. Three, another Algerian associate of Rassam named Abdel Majid Dahoumen, who's inside the United States, he escapes to Afghanistan. But later on, he's actually caught by the Algerian government and convicted in Algeria for crimes with the Algerian Islamic group. Four, investigators actually arrest an individual named Mohamedou Ould Slahi, who they claim was the reason for the Hamburg cell, Mohammed Atta Marwan al-Shehi Ziadjar, to travel to Afghanistan, not to Chechnya. Later on, that whole story was fabricated. Slahi was never convicted, and all his charges were dropped, but yet the poor guy was tortured. And if you want to know more about Slahi's background, watch the movie The Mauritanian. It's a harrowing film, and what they did to this guy. Five, Khalid Deek is arrested for masterminding another Al Qaeda Millennium bombing plot. Deek's name and phone number is found, of all places, in Rassam's telephone book, because Rassam knew Deek from bin Laden training camps in Afghanistan. Both of them have links to the Algerian Islamic group. Now, other people that were involved with the plot escaped the United States after hearing media reports of Rassam's arrest. But I mean, however, enough people are caught to stop an additional second wave of attacks. If this sounds familiar about a second wave, that's exactly what's going to happen on 9/11. And like I said, GJ thermal detonator has reported many times. Is probably one of the very few, besides maybe Paul Thompson, to report on the second wave of attacks for 9/11. And that's coming from news reports, coming from even testimony from Zacharias Moussaoui, who was arrested. Remember, he wasn't tortured. He was arrested in the United States, where he basically said that he was going to be participating in the second wave of attacks. Bob Graham, the co-chair of the Joint House Inquiry, even would later state to reporters that he was well aware that there were going to be additional hijackings other than the four airplanes. Now, in his book Against All Odds, Richard Clarke will say that, quote, I think a lot of the FBI leadership for the first time realized that there were probably Al Qaeda people in the U.S. They realized that only after they looked at the results of the investigation of the Millennium bombing plot, end quote. Yet, Clinton's national security advisor, Sandy Berger, claims that the FBI will still repeatedly assure the Clinton White House, even until Clinton leaves, that Al Qaeda lacks the ability to launch attacks inside the United States. Now, this is directly contradicting George Tenet, who basically said they had the capabilities, and he said that in 98. This is the year 2000. Why are FBI bureaucracy telling White House officials that the Al Qaeda does not have the capability to attack inside the United States when they very well have? They can. On June 23rd, 2001, Rassam enters into a cooperation agreement with the U.S. government, and under the agreement, Rassam cooperates fully with the United States and other governments, including Jordan, Lebanon, Algeria. And the U.S. government would recommend a prison sentence of 27 years. Even in the 9/11 Commission report, this is the reason why I say not everything in the report is false, would state this. For those who don't believe the report is true, this is going to blow you right out the water. The 9/11 Commission report stated that had Ahmed Rassam had been asked about Muhammad Atta, Zacharias Moussaoui, 9/11 could have been prevented. I'll say that again. The 9/11 Commission report stated that had Ahmed Rassam had been asked about Zacharias Moussaoui by the FBI, 9/11 would have been prevented. And if that wasn't enough, on July 19, 2004, it's revealed that the U.S. Justice Department was investigating, of all people, former National Security Advisor under Clinton, Sandy Berger, for unauthorized removal of classified documents from the National Archives in October of 2003, in which he was reading in a room prior to testifying before the 9/11 Commission. The documents were 5 classified copies of a single report commissioned from Richard Clarke covering internal assessments of the Clinton administration's handling of the Millennium bombing plots. An associate of Berger would later say to New York Times that Berger took 1 copy in September of 2003 and 4 copies in October of 2003. What the hell did that guy take? What did he did not want the 9/11 Commission to know? Was it basically that Al Qaeda certainly did have the capabilities to attack inside the United States? And that the FBI certainly told them otherwise? Was that it? Or was there something more? Why didn't the FBI basically allow people from Boston who are known to terrorist abroad and as well in California to live inside the country to basically monitor these people and say that they didn't have the capability to attack the United States when they certainly did, because the Millennium Plot basically destroyed that argument? Why didn't the CIA basically share information with the State Department about Al Qaeda operatives inside the United States? And of course, most of all, the one agency, the NSA, who were listening to the phone calls of Al Qaeda affiliates in Yemen and other Al Qaeda affiliates using cell phones. What do you think they were talking about on those phones? The 1998 East Africa bombing, the 2000 bombing of the USS Cole, the Millennium Plot, hell, 9/11? We won't know because that information is classified. Well, according to former national security executive of the NSA, Thomas Drake, he once said that the NSA had collected so much metadata about the Al Qaeda affiliates in the United States that they alone could have prevented 9/11 from happening if shared with the FBI and the State Department. Just the NSA alone. Just imagine the information that they have. Maybe they don't have any. But I find that hard to believe that these people using broken code words such as wedding over the phone, which could be heard by Jordanian officials who broke up the Millennium Plot, wasn't heard by the NSA, wasn't heard by the CIA. You're going to lead me to believe that the two largest intelligence services in the world didn't have the capabilities or lacked manpower to basically go over the transcripts? What was more important at the time than bin Laden's satellite phone or a house in Yemen owned by Al Qaeda affiliate, known to be linked with bin Laden? What the fuck could have been more important than that? Where you could have had translators every day working around the clock for 5 years, transcribing data from a terrorist group known to the world to conduct terrorist attacks inside the United States and to interests outside of it. Don't give me that nonsense. What did they know and what didn't they share? That is the question. Because if 9/11 could have been prevented, so could have the East Africa bombings and the USS Cole. Excuse me. And if you have any questions, I'll take questions right now if you want, or if not, I could just cut it off right there. But there's a ton of information out there that the intelligence services had and didn't share with each other. We know that with 9/11. Do we know that with previous bombing plots? And like I said, God only knows what the Israelis know, what the Saudis know, because we detained them on visa violations after 9/11 and deported them all. Maybe that's the reason why their crime was visa violation, because the FBI doesn't deal with um, foreign national crimes such as visa violations. They go right to immigration, and what they do is they basically deport them. So the FBI couldn't hold on to, say, the dancing Israelis for long because they violated their visa application, their visa program, and their licenses expired. So they basically were, I mean, through help of two unnamed senators, they were deported out of the country. We'll never know what they knew or what they didn't know. Now, remember, we basically collected 16 hard drives from 16 computers in a very small moving warehouse. 16 computers. The hell was 16 computers? What do you need that for? for a small makeshift moving company. Well, a while ago, John Masseria, a researcher, filed a Freedom of Information request regarding those CD-ROMs, and he was denied. Instead, he got a redacted copy of the FBI and East Rutherford police reports. So he didn't walk away empty-handed. Well, I think I can end it there. We passed an hour. And listen, thank you very much for coming and listening. And I'll see you in the next live stream.